The sky split apart with fire. Warships roared through the clouds, their engines leaving trails of smoke that covered the sun. The forest below shook as bombs fell, tearing ancient trees from their roots. Animals scattered, rivers boiled, and the earth burned. For miles, the world had become a battlefield. In the middle of that chaos ran a boy. His feet stumbled on roots and stones. His lungs burned with smoke, but he kept moving. His village had been destroyed that morning. He had seen the soldiers come in armor of steel, weapons glowing red as they cut down everything in their path. His mother had pushed him away, telling him to run. Her last words were still in his ears as he tried to escape the flames. The boy was small, too young to carry a weapon, too weak to fight. But something inside him refused to stop. He fell once, twice, and blood ran down his knees. Yet he rose. Again, because stopping meant death. The forest was his only hope, though even it burned around him. The ground trembled beneath his feet. At first he thought it was more bombs, but then he heard a sound deep, ancient, filled with pain. It was not the sound of machines. It was a roar, so powerful that the trees bent under its force. The boy froze, his heart slamming in his chest. Through the smoke, a shadow moved. It was larger than the trees, wings dragging across the ground. Like torn sails. Its scales glowed faintly, cracked and burned, as though fire itself had scarred them. Eyes like molten gold shone in the darkness, and the boy knew the stories were true. The dragons were real. Every tale he had heard came rushing back. Dragons were beasts of destruction. They burned armies, shattered cities, and brought fear wherever. They flew. The Empire had hunted them for centuries, building weapons just to kill them. No human who stood before one had ever lived, but the creature that stepped from the smoke was not a monster of fire. It was broken. Its chest heaved with every breath, blood glowing from wounds that no blade could heal. It stumbled as it walked, wings dragging, its claws gouging the earth. This dragon was dying. The boy should have run. His legs screamed for him to turn back, to flee deeper into the forest. But he did not. His fear was real, but stronger than that was something else: pity. He looked at the massive beast, and instead of hatred, he felt sadness. The dragon collapsed onto the ground with a thunderous crash. Dust and ash flew into the air, covering the boy. The creature let out a roar that shook his bones, but it was not a roar of rage. It was the cry of something that had suffered too long. The boy's body trembled as he stepped closer. He did not know why. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was hope. His hand reached out, shaking, until his fingers touched rough scales hot as stone. He flinched, but did not pull away. The dragon's eye rolled toward him, glowing faintly. In it the boy saw his reflection, small, fragile, powerless. Smoke rose from the dragon's nostrils, and for a heartbeat, he thought it would burn him alive. But the fire never came. The creature only watched. "You're hurt," the boy whispered. His voice was broken and small, almost lost in the smoke. But it carried. The dragon blinked slowly, as if confused by the sound. No human had ever spoken to it this way. The boy pressed his palm flat against the scales, feeling the steady but fading beat of the beast's heart. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered again, "Don't die." The dragon rumbled deep in its chest. It did not understand the words, but it felt the meaning. The child's hand was warm, not with fire, not with hate, but with something it had never known from a human care. The boy pressed his forehead against the dragon's skin. He was crying now, but he did not move away. The massive beast lowered its head further, its golden eye closing halfway. It had prepared to die alone in war, but instead it found a fragile hand begging it to live. Above them, the sky burned. Warships clashed, cannons thundered, and soldiers marched. But in the heart of the ruined forest, something else had begun. A bond, fragile and small, yet stronger than fire. The boy had no idea what he had done. He only knew that he would not leave the dragon. And the dragon, for the first time in centuries, chose not to rise in rage. It chose to breathe, to live. Because of a single human hand, the unexpected war had brought destruction. But within it, the first spark of peace had been lit. The forest grew strangely quiet after the boy touched the dragon. The smoke still rose, the ground still trembled, but in that clearing, silence reigned. The boy's hand remained on the beast's. Scales, his small body trembling, but he did not let go. The dragon blinked slowly, its massive golden eye fixed on him. It had burned cities and crushed armies. Yet no human had ever come this close without fear. The boy's voice was still fresh in its mind-soft, fragile words, asking it not to die. The dragon could not understand the language, but it understood. The intent. This was not an enemy. The ground shook again, this time from machines approaching. The boy turned his head and saw shadows moving between the trees. Soldiers marched, their heavy armor glowing red in the smoke. Behind them came machines. Tall as towers, their cannons crackling with power. The Empire's hunters had found the dragon. The boy's heart leapt in fear. He knew what they wanted. He had seen villages burned by these same soldiers. He had seen families dragged away. Now they came for the dragon, not to save it, but to finish it. He pressed closer against the beast's side. The dragon lifted its head, smoke curling from its jaws. Its old fury stirred again, the fire deep in its chest begging to be released. For centuries, it had answered steel with flame. The soldiers raised their weapons, aiming at its wounded body. A single breath could have destroyed them, but the boy whispered again. His voice was shaky, almost lost in the noise of marching feet. "Please, don't fight." The dragon froze. Its throat glowed faintly, but the fire did not rise. Instead, it lowered its head again, pressing its snout into the dirt. The soldiers stopped in disbelief. This was no surrender they had ever seen. This was not the bowing of a beaten beast. This was something else, something they could not explain. The boy stood, his hands shaking, but he stepped forward. He spread his arms as if to shield the dragon. The soldiers muttered among themselves, their helmets hiding their faces. One of them raised his rifle, but his hand trembled. From the sky came the whine of engines. Warships hovered overhead, their cannons glowing. A voice roared through the air from a loudspeaker. "Kill the beast. Kill the child if you must." The boy's eyes widened in fear, but he did not run. He looked back at the dragon, then at the soldiers. His voice broke, but he shouted as loud as he could. "He is not your enemy." The soldiers hesitated. They had been told dragons were monsters. They had been told humans were tools. Yet what they saw now was a child protecting a beast, and a beast kneeling instead of killing. Doubt crept into their hearts. The ships did not wait. A cannon fired, striking the dragon's back with a blast of fire and smoke. The ground shook, trees splintered, and the boy was thrown to his knees. He coughed, choking on ash, but scrambled back to the dragon's side. His small hands pressed against its scorched scales. "Stay with me," he begged. The dragon roared, its voice rolling through the earth like thunder. But still, it did not rise. It covered the boy with one massive wing, shielding him from the next blast. Soldiers stared in shock. A creature that had burned countless armies now endured fire without striking back, all for the sake of a single child. The boy cried, pressing his face into the dragon's skin. "Don't give up, please." His words were tiny against the storm, but the dragon heard them. Its heartbeat slowed, steadying, as if the boy's will flowed into its veins. The soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one, their rifles sank to the dirt. They could not fire. The sight before them was too powerful. A monster was not kneeling. A monster was not protecting. Only something greater than fear could explain this moment. The commanders shouted again, furious, demanding more fire. But even the soldiers looked away, unwilling to obey. Some murmured under their breath, "It's bowing." Others shook their heads in disbelief. The dragon shifted, lowering its head further until its snout touched the ground beside the boy. Its eye closed halfway, not in defeat, but in trust. The boy reached up and stroked its face, whispering through tears. The beast exhaled slowly, the smoke drifting into the air like a sigh. The forest itself seemed to pause. Even the machines, their cannons glowing, held back. No one could break the silence. The boy looked at them all, his voice breaking but firm. "No more fighting." The dragon rumbled low in its chest, agreeing. Its massive body sank deeper into the earth, choosing not to rise in rage. And in that moment, the world shifted. What had been a battlefield became something else entirely. It was the beginning of peace. The clearing still smelled of smoke and fire. The boy's hand rested on the dragon's head, his small body shaking, but he stood firm. The soldiers who surrounded them did not fire. Their orders still echoed through their radios, demanding death, yet their hearts could no longer obey. One soldier muttered beneath his breath, "It's bowing." His words carried across the line, making others lower their weapons. The commanders shouted in rage, calling them traitors, but the doubt was too strong now. Above, drones circled, their lenses recording everything. The image of a dragon kneeling beside a human child was already leaving the forest. Signals flashed through satellites, spreading to nearby warships, then to distant colonies. Within hours, countless eyes would see what was happening here. The boy did not know this. To him, there's only the dragon's breathing, heavy and slow. Its chest rose like a mountain, every breath a struggle, but it still lived. He whispered. Again, soft words of comfort. The dragon's golden eye blinked slowly, and its body relaxed further. The silence broke when the ships above charged their cannons again. The sky glowed red, and the ground hummed under the power gathering overhead. The boy's heart raced, and he pressed himself against the dragon's scales. The beast lifted its wing once more, covering him like a shield. The blast came down. Fire and smoke rolled across the clearing, shaking the earth. The dragon roared, its cry shaking trees to their roots, but it did not rise to fight. Its body absorbed the strike, protecting the boy beneath. Soldiers flinched, covering their faces, yet none fired their guns. The boy coughed, his voice breaking. Tears streaked his face, but he held on. "Stay with me," he whispered again. "Don't go." The dragon's strength wavered. Pain burned through its body, but the boy's voice steadied it. The sound of one child begging gave it more power than fire ever had. Slowly, the glow in its throat dimmed. It refused to burn, even under the storm. The soldiers could no longer stand still. One dropped to his knees, tearing off his helmet. His face was scarred, but his eyes were wide with wonder. "This isn't a beast," he said. "This is something else." Others followed. One by one, weapons lowered to the ground. The line of armored men began to kneel. Their commanders screamed, voices cracking with fury, but even they knew the truth. The army no longer belonged to them. In orbit, captains of warships watched the feed. Some demanded more fire. Others sat in silence, shaken. If even soldiers on the ground were kneeling, what orders could force them to continue? Civilians across colonies saw the same images. Some wept, others cheered. Children pointed at screens, whispering about the boy who had tamed a dragon, not with chains, but with kindness. The boy knew none of this. He was still in the forest, pressing his forehead against the dragon's skin, whispering broken words. Through tears, the dragon's eye softened, its breathing slow but steady. It had prepared to die in rage, but now it lived for peace. The ships above dimmed their cannons, their weapons humming lower. The commanders gave more orders, but hesitation had become rebellion. No soldier wanted to be remembered as the one who fired on a dragon kneeling in peace. The boy stood, swaying from exhaustion, but his voice carried clearly. "He is not your enemy," he said again. The words were simple, but they echoed across the clearing. Soldiers lifted their heads, hearing truth in a child's voice more than in any commander's. The dragon shifted, lowering its snout fully into the dirt. The ground trembled as if the world itself acknowledged its vow. The boy placed his hand there once more, his tears falling onto the beast's scales. From the forest edges, animals crept closer. Birds that had vanished returned to the trees. Even the wind seemed to soften, carrying the scent of life instead of ash. What began as a battle was no longer a war. It had become a moment, fragile yet unshakable. A boy and a dragon, alone yet. Stronger than armies and across the stars, millions were watching. The boy did not know he had already changed history. He only knew that he had saved the dragon from dying in fire. And the dragon, for the first time in centuries, believed in a future beyond war. The image of the boy and the dragon spread like wildfire. Every drone in the sky had recorded it. Signals were carried through satellites, through warships, through stations orbiting far-off planets. Within hours, across the empire, people saw the impossible. An ancient dragon kneeling beside a human child. In crowded cities, people stopped in the streets to stare at the screens. Some whispered in disbelief, others wept openly. Children pointed at the boy's face, their voices full of wonder. Soldiers in distant barracks sat in silence, helmets resting in their hands. What they had been told all their lives, that dragons were only beasts of destruction, was now broken. The Empire tried to shut the feeds down. Their speakers shouted that it was a trick, a lie, an enemy's trap, but it was too late. The truth had already sunk into too many hearts. You cannot erase an image that speaks louder than fear. Back in the forest, the boy remained by the dragon's side, his hand still pressed against the beast's wounded scales, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He did not know that far beyond the forest, worlds were watching. To him, there was only the heavy sound of the dragon's breathing, and the glow of its golden eye. The soldiers in the clearing no longer aimed their weapons. Some had already knelt, others stood frozen, but none dared to fire. Their commanders screamed into their radios, their voices raw with fury, demanding obedience. But the chain of command was breaking. Even hardened warriors could not lift their rifles after seeing the dragon lower itself in peace. The empire was built on fear. Fear of dragons, fear of rebellion, fear of punishment. Yet now, in this burned forest, a boy had undone it with a single act of courage. The ships above hummed louder. Their cannons powered up again, glowing with deadly light. The boy looked up, fear flickering across his face. He pressed himself against the dragon's snout, whispering quickly, begging it not to rise, not to fight. The dragon's wings twitched. Old rage coiled in its chest, the memory of centuries of war begging for release. But the child's voice steadied it. The beast exhaled slowly, lowering its head once more, as if to say, "I will not answer fire with fire." The soldiers below stared in disbelief. One of them shouted, "It's not attacking." His words carried, and more soldiers lowered their weapons to the ground. Their commanders barked again, but their voices no longer held power. The forest trembled as a second cannon blast tore through the air, striking the dragon's back. The ground cracked, trees split, and smoke rose high. The boy screamed, covering his ears, but when he opened his eyes, he was still alive. The dragon's massive body had shielded him again. The boy pressed his face against its scales, his voice breaking, "Don't leave me, please stay." His words were soft, but the dragon felt them like thunder. Its heart slowed, steady and firm, refusing to stop. The soldiers dropped to their knees now, not in fear of commanders, but in awe of what they saw. A dragon that chose peace over rage was something greater than a weapon. In orbit, admirals argued. Some demanded the boy and beast be destroyed at once. Others shook their heads, refusing to stain themselves with such an act. Whole crews on warships muttered in defiance, unwilling to fire. Discipline cracked. Mutiny spread, civilians across. The Empire filled the streets with chants. They no longer cried out in fear of dragons. They cried out for peace. For the first time, the Empire's grip began to loosen. The boy knew nothing of this. His world was still the clearing, still the dragon sighed. He leaned against the beast, his small hand stroking its face. The dragon let out a deep, low rumble, a sound like the earth itself sighing. The wind shifted. The forest, burned and blackened, seemed to breathe again. Birds returned to the branches, their wings glowing in the smoke-filled light. Even the river nearby stirred, carrying the ash away, and in the silence that followed, everyone who saw knew the truth. The war had changed. The boy was no soldier. The dragon was no monster. Yet together, they had broken the chains of fear. It was no longer just a story of battle. It was the beginning of something greater, something the Empire could not stop. The legend of the boy and the dragon had been born. The Empire could not hide what had happened. No matter how hard they tried to block the recordings, the image of the kneeling dragon spread through every world they ruled. Children whispered the story before bedtime. Soldiers shared it in their barracks. Merchants painted it on their stalls. The Empire's greatest weapon, fear, was crumbling, but the rulers in their iron towers were not ready to lose. To them, the boy and the dragon were more dangerous than an entire army. They were not simply alive, they were hope. And hope was poison to an empire built on chains. New orders were given. Not just a squad this time, not just a handful of soldiers. Entire fleets were armed. War machines the size of cities were prepared. Every commander was told the same thing. Crush the boy. Crush the dragon. No matter the cost. Back in the forest, the boy had no idea of the storm gathering above him. He was still by the dragon's side, his hand brushing gently against its wounded scales. The dragon's breathing had steadied, though its body trembled from burns and scars. The boy whispered to it every moment, refusing to leave. The soldiers who had once surrounded them now stayed at a distance. Some guarded the clearing, others simply watched. None dared to attack. Their eyes had changed. They no longer saw a monster. They saw something greater. But when the sky began to darken, they knew the Empire was coming. The air filled with a deep hum, like thunder that did not end. The boy looked up, and his heart sank. Shadows spread across the clouds as massive warships blotted out the sun. The dragon raised its head, its golden eyes glowing faintly. It rumbled deep in its chest, not in anger, but in warning. It could sense what the boy could not. The Empire had brought its full strength. The first ship descended. It was larger than any building, its hull black as night, its cannons glowing red. A voice thundered from it, shaking the trees. Surrender the beast, surrender the child, or be destroyed. The boy's knees shook, but he did not move away. From the dragon, his voice was small, yet steady. We will not. The dragon spread its wings halfway, though they were torn and burned. Its shadow fell across the boy like a mountain. For centuries, it had fought alone. But now, with the child at its side, it would face whatever came. The ground shook as machines dropped from the ships. They were tall as towers, their arms bristling with weapons. Soldiers poured out in thousands, surrounding the clearing in endless rows. Their armor gleamed under the fire-lit sky. The soldiers who had once protected the boy looked at each other. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, but none of them moved aside. One of them muttered, "I will not raise my weapon against him." Others nodded. Slowly, like a tide, they formed a wall in front of the boy and the dragon. The Empire's commander stepped forward in his massive machine, his voice filled with contempt. "You kneel before a beast. You kneel before a child. You kneel before..." Weakness, I will show you strength. The dragon's chest burned, its fire begging to rise. But it turned its eye toward the boy, waiting. The child placed his hand on its face again. His whisper was clear. No more fighting. The beast shuddered. Its flames dimmed. Instead of roaring in rage, it bowed its head lower, pressing it into the earth. Gasps filled the air. Even the new soldiers, hardened by endless war, hesitated. The commanders barked, demanding fire. But doubt had already taken root. Then the sky broke. From beyond the clouds, wings appeared. Dozens at first, then hundreds, dragons. For centuries they had hidden, hunted, and broken. But the call of their elder had reached them. They came, not in rage, but in unity. Their roars shook the sky, a sound not of destruction, but of promise. Boy's eyes widened. He had thought there was only one. Yet now the heavens were filled with wings. The soldiers looked up, terror and awe on their faces. The Empire's commander raised his weapon, but his voice cracked. Even he could not mask the fear now. The boy lifted his hand, his voice carrying through the clearing. No more fighting, he said again, louder this time. The dragons above answered with a roar that shook the stars, and the Empire knew, in that moment, that fear was no longer theirs to command. The sky was filled with wings. Dragons of every size and shape circled above the forest, their cries echoing like thunder across the land. Soldiers on the ground stared upward, their weapons forgotten. Even the machines of war paused, their pilots frozen in awe. The boy stood in the clearing, his small hand resting against the wounded dragon's head. He could feel its strength trembling beneath him, its fire burning low but steady. Around him, thousands of soldiers waited, caught between orders and truth. From the Empire's flagship, a voice roared through the sky. Destroy them. Destroy them all. Cannons powered up, red light glowing across the clouds. The commanders were desperate now. They could not allow hope to live. The dragon's wings twitched. It lifted its head slowly, its golden eyes shining brighter than before. Its fire burned, but it did not release it. Instead, it turned to the boy. The child's face was pale, his knees weak, but his hand stayed firm. He whispered, "Please, no fighting. Not today." The dragon rumbled, a deep sound that rolled through the forest. Then it lowered its head again, kneeling fully into the earth. The sight rippled across the soldiers like a wave. If the greatest of dragons could kneel to peace, what excuse did they have to kill? One soldier dropped to his knees, then another. Soon, hundreds followed, their armor clattering against the soil. The commanders screamed, but their words no longer mattered. The army had chosen. The Empire's fleet above grew restless. Captains argued. Some wanted the fire, others refused. Discipline cracked, loyalty fractured. Crews whispered mutiny, unwilling to stain themselves with the blood of something so pure. But the Empire's flagship ignored them all. Its cannons glowed hotter, its engines roaring. It would fire, even if the rest turned away. The boy looked up and saw the light gathering. His heart stopped. He pressed his forehead against the dragon's scales, tears running down his cheeks. "Don't leave me," he whispered. "Stay." The dragon's chest glowed with light, but not with fire this time. Something deeper, something older stirred within it. A warmth spread from its heart, flowing into the ground, into the air, into every dragon above. The boy felt it through his hand, a power greater than flame, greater than war. The flagship fired. A beam of red light tore through the sky, crashing down toward the forest. Soldiers screamed, birds fled. The earth itself seemed to cry out, but the blast never touched. Wings filled the heavens as the other dragons moved. Dozens, then hundreds, swooped down, weaving together like a living shield. Their scales glowed. Their roars shook the air, and they absorbed the fire in unison. Light flashed across their bodies, but not a single one broke. When the smoke cleared, the boy still stood, untouched, his dragon at his side. Above him, an entire sky of dragons circled, their wings blotting out the sun. The Empire's fleet faltered. Crews refused to fire again. Captains turned their ships away. One by one, the war machines retreated, leaving only silence in their wake. The boy collapsed to his knees, exhausted. The dragon lowered its head gently, nudging him upright. Its golden eye glowed warmly, filled not with rage, but with pride. The child leaned against it, whispering softly, "We did it." The soldiers who remained lowered their banners. No one raised a weapon. No one dared. The boy had ended what armies could not. Across the stars, the story spread. It was no longer just an image, it was a legend. A boy who made a dragon kneel in peace. A beast who chose to protect instead of destroy. Together, they had broken the chain of fear that had ruled for centuries. The Empire would not fall in a day. Its rulers would still cling to power. But from that moment forward, their reign was weaker. Hope had taken root, and it could not be. Killed. The boy did not want glory. He did not seek a throne or crown. He only wanted the dragon to live. And because of that, both had given the galaxy something greater than victory. They had given it peace. The dragon stretched its wings, scarred but strong. The boy climbed onto its back, his hands gripping the ancient scales. Together, they rose from the clearing, lifting into the sky. Soldiers watched, their helmets removed, their eyes wide with awe. As the dragon soared higher, joined by its kin, the boy felt the wind rush against his face. For the first time since the war began, he smiled. Below them, the world was scarred. But above them, the sky was free. And so the legend lived. The human child who made an ancient dragon kneel in peace, and in doing so changed the fate of all worlds.